and reliable.
While Manchester's new tram system cost £135 million, in 1879 the Isle of Man's horse-drawn bone shakers cost considerably less and ran all day on a bag of oats. These horse tram stables in the Isle of Man have been in use for over a century. They might seem quaint now, but by the 1890s, stables like these supported a growing network of trams across Britain. At last, people had what they wanted, the freedom of their cities. Trams have gone from most cities now, but the toy town world of Douglas, the Isle of Man's capital, is still ideally suited to 1-horsepower public transport. With giddy up to get going and a crude ratchet handbrake to stop, driving a horse tram was simple enough, if the horse was willing.
There is a tremendous number of disadvantages with a horse tramway, namely the horses. All of their individual performances are quite distinct and separate from one to another. Quite a lot of them simply have a propensity not to work at all if they can avoid it. And the simple answer was to adopt some form of mechanical traction. You had steam tram locomotives, and there were various other attempts with battery locos and gas trams. And the one that really came into its own was the dear old electric tramcar.
Electricity brought the dawn of the modern age. Along with Blackpool, the Isle of Man pioneered electric trams in Britain. Looking like something out of June, this mercury arc rectifier transforms the AC current we get in our homes to safer and more controllable DC, direct current, suitable to power the motors in a 10-ton tram. The Isle of Man's electrical substation was refitted in 1935 and has been in perfect working order ever since. The brasswork is kept gleaming by substation attendant Joe Cleater, who tends to it daily, seemingly oblivious to the 550 volts pulsing under his brasso.
Next station, the power's on now.
The power comes off the overhead line at 550 volts DC and is picked up by the trolley pole and brought down into the cabling that's in the roof of the car. From there it comes down to the controllers here. Very, very simple things to drive our tram cars. You have the means to make it go and simply the means to make it stop.
The uncomplicated nature of the electric tram ensured its popularity. With driving positions at both ends, trams were easy to operate. To change direction, the conductor swung the trolley pole round and the driver moved to the controller at the other end. Acceleration was a notch-by-notch process.
You have a total of 9 power points altogether. 7, 8, those resistance notches where you're cutting out more and more of the resistance and the car's picking up speed until you get to number 9, or the top notch, hence the term top notch, and that will bring you up to the maximum possible power speed the car will ever do.
Car number 1 is still in top-notch condition, despite being the world's oldest working electric tram. Since 1893, it has run on the Manx Electric Railway, transporting locals and greeting some welcome arrivals. In the 1920s, a trip to the Isle of Man was like going abroad. The island was bursting at the seams with tourists.
The trams, they were stretched from down to the bottom of Summer Hill from the Derby Castle, and each car would come in. They were taking actually roughly 100 people at a time. They were queued and queued and queued. You never thought you were ever going to get rid of them.
Artie Wormsley worked as a conductor on these trams, but tourists weren't his only customers.
I used to have to change the trolley this way, you see. Right? You'd have to load the mail in with the postman that was there. But on the top of that, you had the school children to pick up. You had the milk. Sometimes there was fish down at Kinnay. And then you had, of course, your passengers as well. If it was a freezing day, you had to stand at the back of the car with the trolley rope in your hand and keep hitting the trolley wires. By doing that, you kept breaking the ice all the time.
Through snowstorm and heatwave, the survival of these trams is a tribute to their manufacturers, GF Milnes and Co. But there's little that can go wrong on such a simple and cheap machine. Even when the Depression hit in the 1930s, these hardy beasts provided welcome employment for the island's locals.
If you had a job then, you thought you were the bee's knees. The pay was very, very poor indeed. Roughly 11's farthing an hour. And that was my first wage packet, which was very hard to live on.
90-hour weeks and low pay obviously took the gloss off Artie's outdoor life, but the passengers he carried appreciated the effort.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. One return to Snaefell, please.
Evelyn Fraser has travelled on the trams since the 1920s.
I used to go to Douglas on a Saturday with my mother, and they were always very clean, very well disinfected, which made me feel quite queasy at times. The windows closed, and I used to have to sit out with the driver. When we were children, we would go onto the track, put an ear to the pole, we would hear a noise, and we would know that there was a tram on the way. We had wonderful station masters, so efficient. The one at Laxey wore a frock coat, a great big tall man. I can see him now coming out of the station amid crowds of holidaymakers, thrusting his way through.
In 1895, the Snaefell Mountain Tramway proved the power of electric transport, 2,000 feet above sea level.
When Snaefell Mountain Railway was planned, nobody actually knew for sure that an electric car would propel itself at a 1 in 12 gradient by adhesion alone. Hence, the potential to put additional motors to drive wheels against the fell rail, the centre rail, which in the event were not necessary because an electric tram car would climb a 1 in 9 if necessary without any additional help. It was clever.
Clever enough to make the Isle of Man a fortune. At the end of the last century, 900 passengers a day took a ride up Snaefell. Although the Central Rail was never used for traction on the ascent, it was certainly needed for the way down. The Snaefell brakesman can still rely on elbow grease to stop a runaway. Isolation has helped the Isle of Man stay locked in its time capsule. But on the mainland, as trams met the demands of the 20th century, they had to modernise. Or face the power going off for good.
There may be trouble ahead, but while there's moonlight and music and love and romance, let's face the music and dance.
Because life's a funny old game and your career may not last as long as you think, Allied Dunbar's financial plans adapt to help you face the unexpected.
Let's face the music and dance.
Are you all right? You look like death.
You should have seen the other bloke.
Allied Dunbar, for the life you don't yet know.
Someone you know?
Oh, in passing.
En passant. How very English.
It's history. What a beautiful hotel. 16th century.
But look who's checking in.
Yes, but that's history.
The new Renault Megane Coupe. It talks your language.
The cracking new Argos catalogue is coming out now. For hundreds of price cuts, Argos takes care of it.
He's still engaged. What are we going to do with him, Boo-Boo? It can't be his mother at this time of night. Right, now there's going to be trouble.
Why try and try when you can just press 5? Because with BT's new ringback service, when they finally get off the line, you'll be called back.
Hello?
It's me.
Hi, Susie.
No, it's Brenda, actually.
Don't try and try. Just press 5.
All Renault Meganes are positively bristling with equipment, but there's one feature a Renault Megane Classic gives you that no other Megane does. It's called a boot.
Very comfy too.
Should be. It's bigger than the Ford Scorpios.
The new Megane Classic from 10,995 on the road. Good thinking, Renault.
In the 1930s, British tram technology reached its peak. Blackpool launched futuristic streamliners to an adoring public. They look modern now, but in 1933, it was like having Flash Gordon rocket ships running the promenade. People wanted comfort and style like they had on luxury coaches. The transport manager who gave it to them was tram legend Walter Luff.
He was really a good man for change, was Luff. It was his idea to get some streamlined ones. The balloon came on, the boats, and the rail coach, all through Mr. Luff doing. Well, they were fantastic to what we'd had. I think Blackpool led the way.
Bulbous in design, the double-decker was nicknamed the Balloon. With compressed air brakes and central doors, it became an instant hit.
You would go down to the tram and get on board, and the first thing you would do would turn the seats over in the direction you were going to go. Then you would go down to the end where the compressor switch was on, turn it on so that your tanks would be filling with air. Get hold of your handles for the Westonhouse brake and the handle that locks the motor. Then, once your conductor was with you, you were ready to go.
On Blackpool's beaches, sand meant fun and games, but tram sand was a matter of life or death.
Well, sand was a very important thing to a tram driver. It was the difference between being able to stop and not being able to stop. We used to get what they call a greasy rail, and this was caused by sea spray more often than not, or rainwater, or a mixture of both. And it caused the tram, when the brake was applied, to slide along like a sled. And the only counteract for that was sand in the sand boxes. And you used to stamp on the sand pedal to send spurts of sand down onto the rail, which would counteract this forward slide.
Sand is pumped onto the rails from pipes in front of the wheels. Checking these were unblocked was an important part of Johnny's daily routine. Dry sand is essential for safe emergency braking. But not all tram drivers were as scrupulous with their sandboxes as Johnny.
Well, there were tales of people using them for urinals, but it's terrible to think of because there's ample toilets along the promenade that can be used, and all you had to do was simply tell the timekeeper at these strategic points, like there'd be Talbot Square, Pleasure Beach, Bispam. You only had to tell the timekeeper where you were going, and as long as he knew, you went and came back and you were back on the job again.
Training tram drivers was never done by the book. In Harry Lycover's case, it was done by the custard tart.
Now, my first man that I did my probation with was Reg Crawford, Barmy Reg. He says, I'm taking you out first on a rail coach. Now, out of this little bag, he brings 2 beautiful custards. He says, I'm going to carefully place those 2 custards on the controls. He says, and the Lord help you if you either break these custards or if you drop a custard, because if you do, you'll have them right on your kisser. And believe me, he put the wind up me. So all the way I was on 1 notch, 2 notch, 3 notches. He installed into me the secret, did Reg, of building up on your controls.
From the moment the new balloons took over in the 1930s, driving the huge beasts down the busy promenade was a safety officer's nightmare. Blackpool decorated its brave drivers, but even seasoned campaigners like Johnny Jump don't have a full set of medals.
That's for the 5 years, and that's 10 years. And you know, you went on year after year, but if you had a bump, you went to go back to 1. And that was my misfortune. I'd build my record up to about 3, and then I'd have a scrape, and I'd be back to 1. I remember one of my accidents, I bumped the chief constable. Car, I mean. Although I tried to pull up, I dropped sand and everything, I couldn't avoid it. Wham!
Despite the odd angry bobby, Blackpool's modern trams were thriving. Further south, the streets were still crammed with bone shakers. During the 1930s, Manchester carried over 300 million passengers a year. When war broke out, the city found itself with nearly 1,000 ageing trams and few staff. Hilda, Ethel and Dot were employed as conductresses.
As war was declared on the Sunday, about 4 of us went to the job centre. Some of them said, what about joining the army? I said, no, I'd rather go on the tram if it's possible. And we were taken on right away.
We were females, weren't we? The skirts we ironed, you know, we pressed them so that we boxed them on. And of course we put extra buttons on the cuffs and things like that.
They provided trousers for us, you know, but half of them didn't wear trousers. We like to wear skirts and show our legs.
No. Top guards or nothing.
But we were supposed to wear a hat. I think we only had 1 hat between us. We was always in the ticket office being told off for not wearing your hats. As they come out being told off, pass the hat to the other one before we went in. We was always doing that.
For the new clippy conscripts, working on the trams took them out of cosy front rooms and gave them a glimpse of Manchester's industrial heartland.
The first time I went out, went to Trafford Park. I thought, you know, I imagined it being green grass, etc., you know. And of course, I mean, you know what Trafford Park was like. It was the biggest industrial conurbation in Europe. The Hooter would go, and they were like ants. They just appeared, thousands and thousands of people out of those places. And in that much time, you were full and they were on your way.
In 1945, the conductors came back for their jobs.
I was very upset, you know, and I said, I don't feel like packing it in, you know, the men have got to come back, they want the jobs back. And I had to find another job. And I had to go working inside. I worked in Kendall's in town after that. And it was terrible. After working outside for 7 years and then having to go inside working, it was absolutely murder.
The men didn't have long back on the rails. Post-war Britain saw trams as a menace to road transport, and modern councils didn't want the expense of maintaining track and overhead wires. Buses offered a more flexible alternative. In 1949, Manchester ran what it thought would be its last tram.
For the last time, these rattling and ungainly monsters made their way through the city streets. The last one of all bearing the Lord Mayor, Miss Kingsmill Jones, and other civic dignitaries, and being driven by Councillor Barrett, chairman of the Transport Committee. And there they go into the depot for the last time. Had it not been for the war, London too might by now have discarded her trams. Still, what Manchester does today, London can still do tomorrow.
All over Britain, the tram was dying. But Blackpool plunged into the future. Trams had become one of Blackpool's money-spinning attractions, but in the cost-conscious 1950s, Blackpool Transport made a fatal error. They went for the cheapest option and ended up with a turkey, the Coronation Tram. This is the only Coronation still running of the 25 delivered in 1952.
The low loader came in and we realised this was the new tram. And one of the fitters went over, he'd been looking at it, and he asked the driver what this thing weighed, and he said 19 tons. And we thought, my God, and we sort of scrambled onto the tram. It had been a bit of a shower a few minutes before, and the seats were wet through. It was raining in. We all sensed that this was going to be a lemon.
Once again, the man behind the New Age tram was Walter Luff. His mistake was to complicate the simple machinery that had made his 1930s Streamliner so popular.
Well, I wasn't keen on the Coronation Tram at all. This tram had just like a joystick on your left, and you pushed it forward a notch at a time to get forward motion, and to brake, you used to pull it back a notch at a time. Sometimes you'd find you'd pull the stick back and there wouldn't be a brake, you weren't pulling up. Suddenly realising you had no brake is fearful, you know.
The problems Johnny experienced were caused by the new Bamback system on the roof. Unlike conventional trams, it used the motors to both accelerate and brake.
Building tramcars was an exact science from the Victorian days, and all the bugs had then been ironed out. They put in a system here that would have been ideal for the London tubes, but we couldn't have these conditions on the Golden Mile.
The stop-start nature of the promenade heated the Bamback system to boiling point.
I took the readings the first night that this ran. The current consumption was over twice as much as they'd anticipated. They were literally shaking when I told them this. And we knew then that this was 19 tons, and no matter what they did, they were top heavy. And I thought they'd stop the whole thing. I really believed they'd go back to the manufacturers and they would do it. These trams were absolute death traps.
Transporting passengers was always the plan. Incinerating them was not.
There was a passenger standing next to me. I suddenly looked and his shirt began to disappear. It was disintegrating before my very eyes. It was lathering. I just couldn't believe my eyes. And I suddenly looked up and there was molten solder coming out of that trap up there, and it was just missing him. And I thought, God, they'll panic. And I moved him to one side with an arm around him like that. I'm sure he thought I was bent, this chap there. And it was dripping down.
They tried to save the Coronations by fitting conventional control gear, but Walter Luff's White Elephants were mortally wounded.
The day eventually came when we had to part with them, and they were sold to a scrap merchant, each for £14. And his intention was to take them to a loop at Thornton Gate, set fire to them, and from the big funeral pyre he was going to extract the copper. But he set fire to the first one, and 4 fire engines arrived, and they put his fire out, and they insisted then that he burnt them up by oxyacetylene. And he played hell because even he was losing money on them. So they were game to the last, these things.
Despite the disaster of the Coronation, Blackpool Transport has found ways to make trams pay. This burlesque show bar vehicle is affectionately known by the locals as the Tranny Tram.
Personally, I wasn't too keen on advertising in the first place. I used to like them when they were playing green and cream, but not painted as gaudily as they are now. But then times change, don't they? You have to move with the times, I suppose.
Don't get many of them on a tram now, John.
No, you don't. People are beginning to realise that environmentally we're blasting all this car exhaust and bus exhaust into the atmosphere. There's one thing about them, they're a clean vehicle. And I mean, they can do the job of moving people. The railways and the trams are going to be really big in the future.
In Manchester, the future has already arrived. Many more passengers than expected are buying tickets on the Metrolink. But this is a new kind of tram ride for the 90s. As these sleek beasts leave the city, they adapt to today's fierce transport climate and turn into fast suburban trains. Yesterday's bone shaker has become the super tram of tomorrow.
To pay, you sit close together and spoon all the way.